You're right on time. Just getting started. Okay. The first thing I'd like to mention, thanks for joining us tonight. First thing, this is going to be, I hope it's not going to take too long to get through some of this material. It's not a lot of material. First thing I want to mention is that a few years ago, we visited this topic, and we primarily focused on second day Shavuos. Second day Shavuos, because first day Shavuos, we saw from the Mishnah Berurah that there's a requirement to wait until Tzeis HaKochavim to daven Maariv. What's the reason? We all know this. Tamimos, right? The Torah says Tamimos Tihiena. They have to be complete weeks. So we're not supposed to cut into the 49th day of Sphira by accepting Yom Tov early. And we focused on, so we put that aside, and we focused on what about the second day Shavuos? There's no longer a concern about Tamimos, because you've already done your full 49 days. Can you accept the second day Shavuos early? And we concluded, based on the Ben Ish Chai and a number of other poskim, that there's definitely what to rely on, especially if you live in an area where Yom Tov comes in so late, daylight savings time. Tzeis HaKochavim is going to be 9:39, 9:40 by the second day, p.m. So what we concluded is the main issue, the main problem is cooking on the first day of Yom Tov for a meal that's going to be held on the second day of Yom Tov. And since we know that when we celebrate Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galuyot, that it's considered to be really only a rabbinic part of Shavuos. It's the second day, it's the Rabbanan holiday. Preparing on what's the Deoraita, the first day of Yom Tov, so that you can eat on something which, according to the Torah, from the Torah's view, is really a weekday. You're not allowed to prepare to be mechin mikodesh l'chol. You can't prepare on Yom Tov for a meal that you're going to be having after Yom Tov, biblically speaking, right? So there's a solution. The solution is very simple, and we note it in our schedule that those who would like to daven plag at the plag hamincha, which will be much earlier, let's say like 7:10 perhaps will be mincha, as long as you eat your full meal, or you have the majority of your meal, you've done all of your cooking and you're going to have the main part of your meal before Shkia, going into the second day, then you're really having a meal on the first day of Yom Tov, you're cooking it on the first day of Yom Tov, and you're having it on the first day of Yom Tov still, right? And the fact that we allow you to make Kiddush for the second day early, it's not a stira, because Lamaisa, it's still Shavuos. So you're doing everything according to protocol. Shkia this year will be around 8:54 p.m. So essentially what we're going to be telling people, make sure if you daven with the plag minyan to have all of your food heated up and put on the table so that people can partake of the meal before 8:54 p.m. Okay? And that way you've covered all your bases. If, however, what's that?
You have to finish the meal?
You don't have to finish the meal. No, as long as you've got everything out on the table and the main part of the meal is, I don't think you even have to consume it. It's as long as everything is out of the oven and on the table before Shkia, you're totally okay. And in this way, you haven't really prepared from Kodesh to Chol. You're preparing from Kodesh to Kodesh. Everything's being done on the first day. Probably it's a good idea. When I think about it, it's at least to have made Kiddush and Hamotzi and to have started to partake of the meal that's on the table before Shkia. It's before 8:54 p.m. Now that is a very reasonable thing to expect, but we put it in the bulletin anyway. As we're going to discuss tonight, so that's old stuff. Okay, we covered that, I think, either a year or 2 years ago. We talked about that whole idea. What I want to talk about tonight is I want to revisit the psak of the Mishnah Berurah, which is taken as a given, because it's the Mishnah Berurah after all, that the first night, not only can you not make Kiddush before Tzeis HaKochavim, but you're not even allowed to daven Maariv before Tzeis HaKochavim. What is the basis for this halacha? So it's important that we trace it. The Taz is the original source for this halacha. Not the original, sorry, but the Taz codifies this in his gloss, in his introduction to Simin Taf Tzadi Dalet, and he says, Me'acharin lahatchil arvit bichnisat Shavuot, we delay beginning Arvis, beginning Maariv, when Shavuos enters, kedei sheyihiyu yemei hasfira timimot, in order that the days of Sfira should be a full 49 without cutting any corners. Fine. Now contrast that with the Magen Avraham, who's the other major commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. B'leil Shavuot ein mekadshin al hakos ad seit hakochavim dichtiv timimot tihiyana. What's the difference between the Magen Avraham and the Taz? Someone yell it out. Maariv versus Kiddush. Big difference, right? As you know, quite often, we tell people, we're going to daven Maariv early, but like the night of the Seder, we're going to daven Maariv early, but make sure you don't make Kiddush until Tzeis HaKochavim. Now, there are certain kehillas that are makpid to not do that. What's their argument? Their argument is that if you come home before Tzeis HaKochavim, the women and the less learned people are going to assume that they can start making Kiddush, and therefore we basically hold you in shul prisoner until Tzeis HaKochavim to make sure that you won't get home before Tzeis. Okay? I feel that because so many of our Yomim Tovim come in so late, because we live in a more northern latitude, then it's an undue burden. And as we'll see, the minhag of not accepting, of waiting until Tzeis HaKochavim to daven Maariv on the night of Shavuos was not historically accepted by all European communities, depending upon the latitude of the city. Because let's say you live in, even if you live in London, right? Do you know what time Tzeis HaKochavim is in London during Shavuos? Or in Belfast, or in Glasgow.
It's actually an hour and a half later.
Yeah, it's much later.
We're in the same latitude as northern Spain. Toronto is the same latitude as northern Spain. England and everywhere is a good 10 degrees north of that.
Yeah, that's right.
And then Glasgow is almost the Arctic Circle as compared to.
There you go. Okay, so the frozen chosen, right? That's what we call ourselves. So in any event, as we'll see historically, not all Jewish communities accepted this halacha upon themselves. The Mishnah Berurah codifies it. He lives in the Heimische Galicia in Radin, and so it's reasonable, so let's say, but not in more northern cities. What?
Probably north of where we are.
Do you think so? But they didn't have daylight. They didn't have daylight savings in Radin, I don't think. Yeah.
The difference is between the time of making Kiddush and the time of daven Maariv.
Where is more north than?
Isn't that big a difference anyway?
It is. It's a big gap. Well, it is. Because when you think about it, yeah, it's at least a half hour because you're going to daven Maariv, then you're going to schmooze for a couple of minutes, wish everyone a good yontif, then you're going to walk home. It's at least a half an hour.
It's like London, so in Glasgow, instead of 11, you're starting at 10:30. It's still.
Okay, it's still quite late, but we'll see that many communities didn't even accept the Magen Avraham historically, and they would actually daven Maariv and make Kiddush before it was even Shkia. They would wait until Plag. Now, so first of all, you see a discrepancy between the Taz and the Magen Avraham. The Taz says you cannot daven Maariv until Tzeis HaKochavim because of Timimos. The Magen Avraham says you cannot make Kiddush. So he seemingly is allowing for davening Maariv, okay? And that's what the way the Meforshim understand. The question is, what's the basis of this machlokes between the Taz and the Magen Avraham? So we take a look at the Shalah HaKadosh. He is actually, based on what I've been able to research, he's the first from the 16th century. He's actually the first who is machmir that you have to wait until Tzeis HaKochavim. But the Shalah only requires Kiddush. So he says, Chag HaShavuos, Hu Asher Tziva Hashem Yisborach, Lasos Chag Asher Shiva Shavuos Shel Esfira. He tells us we celebrate Shavuot 7 weeks after 7 weeks of counting. V'kibalti mimori hagon maharash zal milublin shekibel ish mipi ish ad mipi hagon Rabbeinu Yaakov Falk zal shelo la'asot kiddush v'lechol belel rishon shel Chag Shavuos ad seis hakochavim. This is my Kabbalah from my Rebbeim. It goes back originally to Rabbeinu Yaakov Falk. Maybe he's a century before. That you cannot make Kiddush until Tzeis HaKochavim. V'atam, mibnei shebisfira ksiv sheva shabasos timimos tihiyena. V'im kain, let me just put this on the screen. I forgot to show, I'm recording. I got to share this on the screen. Sorry. And therefore he says, V'im kain, keshemekadesh ba'od yom mechaser oso hamiktsas mimemtes yimei asfira. If you were to make Kiddush earlier, you would be in some way detracting from the 49 days of Sfira. Shaharei Chag Shavuot hu la'achar Sfira, Sfira eino Shavuot, u'cheshem HaKadesh im kein mekabel al atzmo ha'chag u'mechaser oto ha'miktzat mimei ha'sefira v'nimsa she'inan temimot. You basically are detracting, you're subtracting from the 49 days, and they're no longer complete. And we're not going to, for the sake of brevity, we're not going to go into the whole thing. I just want to show you a sefer called Hilchos Chag B'Chag. It's got 15 chalakim. It's a very, it was written in the mid-20th century. It goes through all the halachos of the Yomim Tovim. And it says, Ma'acharin li'itpalel arvit achar tzeta kochavim vadai. We wait to daven Maariv until it's tzesa kochavim. Mishum sheva shabbatot timimot tihiyena, because of this concern. V'yesh omrim she'ikar ha'kepeda al zeh b'kiddush v'lo b'tfilah. Some say, like the Shalah and the Magen Avram, that it's only Kiddush and not davening. And then he says, Uve Eretz Yisrael haminhag lahachmir bazeh. And in Eretz Yisrael, the minhag is to be machmir, to not start Maariv until Tzeis. However, avol b'chutz la'aretz, shemakdimim lihitpalel, ra'ui al kol panim shahakiddush yihiyeh balayla. Now, in Chutz La'aretz, he's not saying everywhere in Chutz La'aretz, but in certain communities in Chutz La'aretz, which have a very high latitude, a very northerly latitude, he says you should, where they daven before Tzeis, you should try at least to wait until Tzeis to make Kiddush. V'mitpalalu kodem hazman, yesh lahakpid likrot kriyat shma miyad achar tzeit hakochavim, shebeleil zeh ein lismoch al kriyat shma shalamita lefi shenei orin kol halayla. And now you see another concern. There's another concern that we're going to see traces back to the Hisorus L'tshuva from the son of the Chassam Sofer, who says there's a secondary concern as to why you should not daven Maariv early. Even if you go like the Shalah and the Magen Avram, who say that the concern is only on Kiddush and it's not a problem with davening, there's still a reason to wait until Tzeis HaKochavim to daven Maariv. Why? Because when we daven Maariv early, we're going to be lenient, because even though we haven't yet been Yotzei Kriya Shema in the evening, it's not a problem, because everyone before they go to bed says Kriya Shema Lamita, and by saying Kriya Shema Lamita, you'll fulfill the mitzvah deoraita of reciting Kriya Shema B'shoch Bicha when you go to sleep if it's already night. What's the problem with Shavuos? No one goes to sleep. Everyone stays up all night. So there's a secondary compelling reason to wait until Tzeis HaKochavim for davening Maariv, because you may forget to recite Kriya Shema, because you're not going to recite Kriya Shema Lamita. Okay? Now, in order to understand the commentary, this is the halacha, and in the Haggah, the Sefer tells us tries to explain the machlokes between the Taz and the Magen Avram. That whereas according to the Magen Avram, it's only Kiddush that we care about for as not to intrude on the Tamimos. And according to the Taz, even davening Maariv is an intrusion. Okay, so let's see. So the Taz, so in order to understand this, I just want to take a look at a little snippet of the Taz in Siman Taf Reish Samech Ches, which is in Hilchos Sukkah. In Hilchos Sukkah V'Lulav, there's a discussion about Hoshana Rabbah going into Shmini Atzeres. And there, the Taz, it's a very, very long Taz. It's like a whole long exposition. And just a little snip of it, he says, Vadai Misha Mosif Michol al HaKodesh, Hu Osa al Pit Sivoy Toratenu. So he says, anyone who accepts Yom Tov early is empowered by the Torah to add some of the new holy day and to add it to the outgoing mundane day. כבר חילי והולך ממנו חובת היום, מה שהיה עליו קודם זה, והווה כמו בלילה ומחר ממש. So as soon as you accept upon yourself the Kedushas Hayom, you have now voided the previous day, even though it's still light outside, and it's as if it's for all purposes the new day. It's the new Yom Tov. That's the Taz Shita. In regard to what? In regard to, let's say you daven Maariv early, the night of Shmini Atzeres. Can you now, if you go into the sukkah, can you make a leishev basukkah? So the Taz Shita is unconditionally not, you cannot make a leishev basukkah, because by accepting Yom Tov early, you have completely voided the Hoshana Rabbah, and it's now Shmini Atzeres for all purposes, okay? The Chiyuv Sukkah shelefanenu he mitzad haknisa and mitzad hachila al kein he nimneet mimenu b'shah shekibel kedushas Yom Tov shel Shmini Atzeres shebo soter mitzvat sukkah v'yesh lo yecholet lasot kein. So he says, and a person is empowered by Hashem to be able to do that. But once you've done that, you've removed from yourself any opportunity to fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah. Not that there's anything wrong with that, because you're not mechuyev to sit in the sukkah 24 hours a day. But if you wish to accept the kedusha of Shmini Atzeret, then you have now removed the opportunity to any more fulfill the mitzvah of yeshivat sukkah. And so therefore his conclusion is, if you want to sit in the sukkah, fine, but you certainly cannot make a bracha. Sitting in a sukkah, anyone can do any day of the year, but you certainly can't make a bracha. So with that information, take a look at the Haggah of the Sefer Hilchos Chag B'Chag, where he says, Devadai Misha, Uvevir ha'inyan, ma hachisaron b'tfilah v'kiddush kodem. What really is the explanation? Like, why is it that you're not allowed to daven or make kiddush, depending upon which shita you hold like? Tzarech biur, dema gora b'kach shemekabel tosefet yom tov u'mitpalel kodem hayom. Like, what's the big deal? By davening earlier, are you really making it not tamimos? He says, "B'amen nigra bekach mehayom hakodem v'lama lo chashu bekach memtet yamim tamimim." And why is it no longer considered to be 49 complete days? V'lichora yesh lomer dahataz l'shitato. It would seem that the taz is l'shitaso. B'simin taf reish sam. He means to say taf reish sam ches. De b'kabalat tosefet Shabbos. Nifka hayom shekodem lo. You've voided the previous day. Once you've accepted upon yourself kedushas hayom through either tefillah or kiddush, you voided the previous day. V'im ken yesh lomer dim yikabel hachag kodem hari nifka hayom hakodem ve'ein kan memtet timimot, and you no longer have 49 complete days. Aval be'emet sham lo kaimelon kahataz. But the reality is we don't really paskin like the taz. Ela naktinen de tosefet eina mafkaat yom she'avar ela rak mosefet alav dinim shel hayom haba al hayom hakodem. But in reality, it does not actually do that. We don't paskin like the Taz. I don't know the whole shtickle as far as, but he demonstrates this. We don't paskin like the Taz that you completely void the previous day, the mitzvahs of the previous day. All you do is you add upon yourself the new mitzvahs of the new day. So it could be that this is the basis of the machlokas between the Magen Avram and the Taz. The Shalah and the Magen Avram on one side and the Taz on the other side. The Taz would argue that any declaration that it is now the Yom Tov is an intrusion and avoiding of the previous day of Chol. And therefore you've imposed a problem on it's no longer Timimos. But according to the Magen Avram and the Shalah, even though there's a requirement that you have to wait until Tzeis to make Kiddush for Timimos, but your declaration in Tefillah that it's now Shavuos does not take away the fact that it is still the 49th day of the Omer. That only happens when you do something more declarative through the recital of Kiddush. Okay, yes, Elon.
Talking about the same thing, if you go from first day to second day, that you're taking away from the Doraisa day? Or it's just
Yeah, it doesn't do that. It could be that some might argue that, but I haven't seen that svara brought down because by saying Kiddush, you're not negating. In other words, when you say Kiddush, tonight is Shavuos, and it's going from the 49th day of the Omer to Yom Tov, you're saying essentially that it's no longer Chol, it's now Kodesh. It's no longer the 49th day, it's now Chol. But if I'm on the first day of Shavuos and I make Kiddush in the afternoon after Plag HaMincha, I'm not negating the first day because I'm still saying it's Shavuos, right? So I'm not in any way, I'm not making a declaration that is voiding the first day of Shavuos.
Does this notion that you're taking away from the previous day also apply to the question of any other day of Shkira and counting? Or some people count after say, some people
Right.
maybe Shkia.
Right.
After
Right.
Shkia. So is that like taking away from the 12th day and making it shorter? Is that?
Yeah, so there is some discussion. I noticed that there's some discussion about that. Some want to argue that because of this imperative of Tamimos, you have to be careful on the first night of Sfira, like the second night of Pesach, right? That you have to count Pinklich at Tzeis HaKochavim. You shouldn't delay it until later because then it's not Tamimos from the beginning end and not from the back end. And of course, we're not makbid. We do allow people at midnight or 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning to count Sfira. What about Tamimos, right? So for some reason, we're only makbid on the back end. We're not makbid on the front end. But there is such an argument that is brought, and that could apply perhaps to each one of the 49 days. Don't shortchange the previous day by counting early. I've seen that svara brought down, but it's not something that we're really choshesh for.
Moshe has an interesting tshuva. Somebody forgot to do Sfira on Thursday night. Then he brings his Shabbos Friday early.
Yeah.
He says he can still count Sfira because even though he's Makabel Shabbos, at the end of the day, you go outside, it's still light outside.
Right. And also the whole thing is a sfek sveka, so you could still count, and even with a bracha, because maybe it's separate mitzvahs. There's so many layers of safek, so that accepting Shabbos early does not negate your ability to still count Sfira. It's a good point, Sim. In the Shut Binyan Shlomo, he asked the following shaila. This is from the 19th century. Ro'i levar nidon masha kosav hashla kadosh v'magen Avram the belel Shavuot ein mekachin al hakos ad seis hakochavim d'chsiv timimo. So he says, I want to clarify this whole shaila. Im yesh lazeh makor b'gemara. Is this sourced at all in the Gemara? So this is an important point. I quote at the very end from a sefer called Sharshei Minhag Ashkenaz, which is a contemporary sefer, the roots of all of the Ashkenazic minhagim. So you'll be happy to know, Elon, that the Sephardim don't do any of this stuff. You can count early and you can accept Yom Tov early. It's not a problem for Sephardim. The Ashkenazim are the only ones who have these mishagasim with the Chumrah. It's important to know that before the Shalah HaKadosh, whole communities in Europe were davening early on the night of Shavuos and making Kiddush early the night of Shavuos. The Kiddush was the Chumrah. It wasn't the Kula. Right? It started, this Chumrah of waiting until Tzeis HaKochavim for Kiddush only started with the Shalah. And then later, like a couple of centuries later, or the Taz is at least 1 century after the Shalah, then it became another chumrah to wait until tzeis for davening Maariv. So the question that is the Binyan Shlomo is asked, is there any basis for this in the Gemara? So he writes the tshuva. He says, "Hineze yoter mishloshim shana asher amadati litmoa al divrei hashalah v'hamogen Avram." For 30 years now, my whole career, I've been just astounded about this Shalah and the Magen Avram, the Katvu Deroi Lahamtin B'Tfilo V'Kiddush B'Leil Shavuos Ad Shehei Vadai Laila, that you should wait until Tzeis before davening and making Kiddush. He's not exactly being precise, because according to the Shalah and Magen Avram, you only have to wait until Tzeis for Kiddush. He says for davening and Kiddush. He really means the Taz. Mishum b'chtei sheyeh sheva Shabbosos timimos, v'halo yadua tetosefes Yom Tov hu deoraisa, bein b'chinisaso uvein b'yetziaso. Now we know, isn't there a mitzvah of Tosefes Yom Tov? We learn that out from which holy day, by the way? How do we learn out the mitzvah of Tosefes Yom Tov? Yom Kippur. What does it say? B'tisha lachodesh ba'erev. Yom Kippur is described as the 9th in the evening. Well, it's not the 9th in the evening, it's the 10th. So the Gemara says what we learn from here, that there's a mitzvah for every holy day, for Shabbos and Yom Tov, to be mosif min hachol al hakodesh, to add from the mundane day, Erev Yom Tov, onto the holy day, not only at the beginning of the holy day, but also at the end also, which is why we add a little bit of time after, before we make Havdalah. And this is a mitzvah deoraisa. V'lo matzinu chiluk bein bazeh, bein chag Shavuos l'sha'ar hamoadim. And since when should there be any distinction between all other holy days and Shavuos? Like, why on Shavuos are we dafka telling a person, don't be mosif mehachol ala kodesh? Wait until Tzeis HaKochavim before you even start by saying Baruch. Like, aren't you nullifying the mitzvah of being mosif michol ala kodesh? V'afilu l'das harambam de tosefes Shabbos v'Yom Tov l'inin melacha hu mid'Rabbanan mikol makom mid'Rabban misas noi kedushas b'kedusha b'tosefes l'inin melacha. Even if you're going to argue like the Rambam says that it's only d'Rabbanan, it's not a d'oraisa, but still, how can you nullify a mitzvah d'Rabbanan out of a concern that is not documented anywhere in Shas, anywhere in Chazal? So let's skip to the next paragraph. Ra'iti lachkor. So I was always trying to figure out, like, how do we institute this chumrah, which ends up being a kula because we're not having Tosfos Yantiv. So he says, umatzasi be'ezras Hashem, the dvar Hashem befihem emes, that there is truth. They are speaking the truth. That what? There is no mitzvah of Tosefes Yantiv specifically at the beginning of Shavuos. Why? He says, "V'yesh makor lidivrehem mimikra molei b'Torah." And I have a source in the Torah. Dichsiv b'parshas Emor gabe chag haShavuos ukrasem be'etzem hayom hazeh mikra kodesh yihiyeh lachem. That on that same day, be'etzem hayom hazeh. What does be'etzem mean? On the essence of that day, you shall call a holy convocation to the Lord. Which means, why be'etzem? Why you have to add that word be'etzem specifically by Shavuot? He says, I'll tell you why. He says, "Barei matzinu biyoma dedorish lekroi sham dichtiv tlat zimni be'etzem hayom hazeh beparshat Emor gabe Yom Kippurim." It says the words be'etzem hayom hazeh 3 times in the context of Yom Kippur. Chad b'lo taseh de melacha, v'chad ba'onesh de melacha, v'chad ba'onesh de inoi. V'dorish lehu hatam lim'utei tosefes Yom Kippurim me'onesh ve'azhara ben b'melacha u'vein be'inoi ayin sham. So be'etzem hayom hazeh is a miut. In the context of Yom Kippur, what Chazal learned from the words be'etzem hayom hazeh means that even though there's a mitzvah of Tosefet Yom Tov, nonetheless, if a person were to violate Yom Kippur, either through eating or doing malacha, when he already accepted Yom Kippur, but before Tzeis HaKochavim, he would not get kares, he would not get any penalties. In other words, you only get be'etzem, you only get the penalty if it's be'etzem hayom hazeh, in the context of Yom Kippur. Now, how do we understand it in the context of Shavuos? V'achi kaimalan, etc., etc., etc. Skip a couple of lines. He says, "Va'al kein yesh lanu lomar be'emet, da'hachinami ati lemutei tosefet chag hashavut gabi ma'aseh greda." And maybe the words be'etzem hayom hazeh written in the context of Shavuot is coming to exclude from us the mitzvah bichlal of Tosefet Yom Tov. Uchanamrinan b'yom ha'kippurim mehach miuta debetzem hayom hazeh tosefet me'azhara hachanami mema'atinan l'chag hashavuot gam me'aseh v'alkein hatam bazeh mishum dibo'inan timimot. And it's because you need to have timimos. V'nimtza d'divreim zal hanal yesh lehem makor usmach mimikra molei b'Torah kein amarti mikvar. And that's the source of the Magen Avraham and the Shalah, that the Torah is specifically telling you, I want you to have timimos. Now, I'm also going to share with you outside a statement from the Meshech Chochmah. And with this, because I don't want to keep you too long, the Meshech Chochmah also points out that there's another reason why you shouldn't be able to start until Tzeis HaKochavim. He says, what did the Baitusim say about Usfartem Lachem Mimocharat HaShabbat? You always start counting on Motzei Shabbos. Always the first day of Sfira, Hayom Yom Echad Ba'omer, is always when? Saturday night. Now, Saturday night, are you allowed to do Malacha before you count Sfira? No, you can't be Mosif on Saturday night and say that it's already you can't start counting early if it's Saturday night. So the Meshech Chachma wants to argue. He says, V'had de gilta rachmana ze gabe Shavuos mishum de bala horos lanu de lo nefarish kra kipirish hatzedukim mimacharas hashabbos mamash v'yeh tamid atzeres achar Shabbos. It's to teach us that we should not be like the tzedukim or the baitusim, same difference, that we should start counting on Saturday night. V'imkein tamid tosefet shalo havi Shabbos v'havi mikra kodesh v'asar b'malacha. He says that if we were to add on to it, it would be Mikra Kodesh before the Sfira starts. And so therefore what we want to do, because if you start counting on day one on Saturday night, it turns out that Shavuos will also always be on a Saturday night. He says, and that's what we don't want you to do. We don't want you to add on and bring Shavuos early and say, well, it's the Kedushas Hayom will extend from Shabbos into Yom Tov. L'chein Omar be'etzem Hayom hazeh avol betosvo shelo muter b'melacha. He says that's why the Torah says be'etzem Hayom hazeh. We only want you to have Kedusha on the day itself, not the hours before the day starts, which is to counter the Tzedukim who said that the hours before Shavuos starts are always Mikra Kodesh because it's Shabbos. So there's a similar idea here. Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh teaches us that you're supposed to have Temimos, and the Meshech Chachma says it's also based to be Motzi Miliban Shel HaTzedukim. So finally, and so I quoted outside the Hisorus Tshuva, who says that the concern is, the reason why we want you to wait to daven, like the Taz says, is because of Kriya Shema. And all you have to do, of course, is just remind your guests to recite Kriya Shema, so you're covered. Okay, you don't have to worry about that. By the way, I'm not going to let you out of here by confirming our minhag is to wait until it says before we daven Maariv. We're not going to be lenient on this one, unfortunately. Sorry about that. It's not like, so if there was any bait except for Elon Dishi, you can make your own minyan and you can daven early and eat to your heart's delight, and without indigestion. So you're fine. But the rest of us, the ashkis in the room, have to be machmir because that's the minhag of the kehillah. I'm not aware of a single shul in all of Toronto that accepts that davens Maariv before Tzeis HaKochav. So we're not going to be mekel. We're mekel on other zmanim of the year when coming into Yom Tov, like we'll be mekel and have a plag minyan on the first day going into the second day, using the kula that we mentioned before from the Ben Ish Chai, that we will allow. But when it comes to Temimos, it's been such an accepted norm within most Jewish communities that we're not going to be lenient. But the Sefer Shorshei Minhag Ashkenaz traces the history of this minhag and how it became more and more chamor to wait until Tzeis HaKochavim before you even daven like the Taz. And he says in his sikum, in his summary of his, what's the word I'm looking for? At the end, the conclusion. In the conclusion of his essay, where he goes through the synopsis of what he's mentioned, he says as follows: Hein hamakdimin vehein hama'achrin kol od libam lashamayim osim ritzano shel makom. Whether you accept Shavuos early or you make it late, as long as your kavan is l'shem shamayim, you're doing Hashem's will. And because what he's done is he's traced Jewish communities like in Helsinki and in the Netherlands that never followed this psak because it was ridiculously late. And in some communities, it would get dark this time of year for like an hour, like at 3 o'clock in the morning. You were there for Shavuos, right? Okay. And by the way, in London this time of year in June, I've been in London. I woke up in the middle of the night when I was a kid in London, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was light, right? So it's so anyway. Kedevre Rabbi Yosef Yuzpa han Norlingen me Frankfurt de Main Bal Yosef Ometz Alaminag Hamtana Belil Shavuos Mishum Temimos Rachman Liba Boy Vechan Amar Bevechan Amam B'Davashi Yechavin Liba Lashmaim. So this Rav in Frankfurt was Makel, and he said those who want to be Machmir should do so, those who want to be Makel should do so, so that we can have Simchas Yantif with our families. But he says as long as your kavan is L'Shem Shamayim. Achein al chumras hahamtana litzeit hachochavim belel Shavuot hitbatei b'tza'ar Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Bal Mincha Shlomo. Reb Shlomo Zalman had something to say, and he said these words with pain. Reb Shlomo Zalman, when he commented on this practice of waiting until Tzeitzah Kochavim. Bedin timimo shel sfira sa'omer ma'od medaktikin. He says people are so machmir on this halacha, said Reb Shlomo Zalman, lamrod shezerak merumaz b'pasuk, even though it's only a remez in the verse, like we saw from the Binyan Shlomo. Be'ilu tamim tiya im Hashem elokecha, pasuk shalim. But there's another timimos that's written in the Torah. Tamim tiya im Hashem elokecha, be innocent with the Lord your God. Be honest. Be innocent. Don't try to cut corners. That's what tamim tiya. Upachos medaktikim bo, and people are less machmir in tamim tiya than tamimos tihiyena. Es ota hashva'a sa Rabbi Yisachar Shlomo Teichtal Bal Mishnes Sachir of Teichtal also, who wrote the Ema Bonim Smecha, but also Shilas Shuvas Mishnes Sachir. We all know he was killed at the end of the war. He says Ela Shehu Hela Ota B'Lashon Tvia, but he said it in terms of making us a bit of a criticism. He said Ad Shemedaktikim Shelo Yechsar Mimei Asvira Sheyu Temimos B'Kiddush Utfil. He says if instead of being so machmir to wait until Tzeis HaKochavim before you daven and before you make Kiddush, Yidaktiku lasod ritzano shel makom uvazeh yihiyu temimos beemes k'mosh amru Chazal b'midrash, and then you'll truly be temimos. You're looking for completeness, right? Temimut. You want temimos? There's other things to work on besides waiting until Tzeis HaKochavim to daven Maariv. K'fi Shoshana Rebbi Chia Sheva Shabbatot Temimot Tiyana Eimatai Hein Temimot, like the Medrash says, in the name of Rebbi Chia. There shall be 7 complete weeks. The Medrash says, when are they complete? Bisman she Yisrael osin ritzano shel makom, when the Jewish people do God's will. When we are obedient servants of Hashem, that's what the true definition of Sheva Shabbosos Timimos is. That's the Timimus of the Timimos is the way we behave during those 7 weeks, not necessarily or not primarily whether we wait until Tzeis HaKochavim or not, which is really just a side issue, a technical issue. Anyway, that's what I wanted to share with you tonight. We're going to wait until Tzeis HaKochavim to daven Maariv. That's the minhag of the community. But I wanted to put this into perspective. Number one, you have the sheet of the Magen Avram in the Shalah, which is the original Chumrah to wait only for Kiddush, for Tzeis HaKochavim, not for davening. You also have the whole issue of certain whole communities never accepted the Chumrah of the Shalah and the Magen Avram for even Kiddush because it wasn't practical. And therefore some, as we saw from this more contemporary Sefer, Hilchos Chag B'Chag, the Eretz Yisrael has accepted this, Chutz La'aretz hasn't. That's not the way the Mishnah Berurah paskins. But it seems like there's certain wiggle room be'eis hatzorech for situations of need. So for example, what's a situation of need? We know this from the laws of the Seder also. If there's someone in your home who is infirm, someone is sick, and they want to be able to eat early because they're not able to stay up that late, so certainly you can be mekel for that individual. And there might even be room to be mekel for the entire family if it's for kavod habrios for that particular individual.
We have always, and we follow the following custom on the first day Shavuos. We daven mincha on a road. We daven mincha on a road. We sit down to a full yotov meal, soup, main course, and then we bench chol.
Yes.
And then we wait until the appropriate time.
Yes,
we bench Maariv.
You daven Maariv.
Then we say Kiddush, and we have lentzes, cheesecakes, and so on. That's what we've done every single year.
I'm getting hungry already. Okay. All right.
What is the lashon of the mechaber?
I mean,
before we get to the Taz and the Magen Avram,
Mechaber never mentions this halacha. Not at all. This is all from the Taz and the Magen Avram. It's in the Hakdama of the Taz and the Magen Avram to Simin Taf Tzadi Daled. The Mechaber doesn't talk about it at all.
So what did this Sephardim base there?
I just said the Sephardim can do whatever they want.
Right, but
They're free. They're free. Why?
Does
Because
anybody have a comment?
because there's always a mitzvah of Tosefes Yom Tov. You can accept Yom Tov early. Yeah, the burden of proof is on the Machmir, not on the Mekel. You understand, right?